guys, it's Mr. Gusso here with Schooled. We're going to read chapters 4, 5, and 6 today. All right, chapter 4 is from the point of view of Capricorn Anderson. What are you looking at, jerkface? What are you looking at, buttwipe? The first boy swung his book bag around and slammed it into the side of the other's head. He responded by punching the first boy in the nose, and soon the two were rolling on the grass, grunting and raining blows on one another. I was horrified. I'd read about physical violence, but this was the first time I'd witnessed it in real life. It was sudden and lightning fast, wild, vicious, ugly. In seconds, a ring of spectators formed around the brawlers. Their gleeful chants echoed all around the schoolyard. Fight, 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 fight! Break it up, a teacher burst into the circle, a brawny man with a whistle around his neck. He squeezed himself between the combatants and pushed them apart. All right, who started it? He did, the two chorused, each pointing at the other opponent. The teacher gazed around at spectators. Any witnesses? Nobody said a word. Come on, who saw what happened? I did, I volunteered. Well? Buttwipe wanted to know what Jerkface was looking at, and Jerkface wanted to know what Buttwipe was looking at. I turned earnest eyes on the bloody and dirt-smeared brawlers. You were barely 3 inches apart. Couldn't you see you were both looking at each other? The teacher reddened. Who do you think you are, Jerry Seinfeld? You must have me confused with another student, I told him. My name is Capricorn Anderson. Are you talking back to me? I hesitated. The whistled teacher had asked me a question, and I answered by talking. Yes, I ventured uncertainly. By the time he was finished yelling, both fighters had boarded their buses and gone home. I was the one who got sent to Mr. Kasiji's office. I was waiting on the bench when Mrs. Donnelly appeared. I leaped up. Is Rain going to be okay? That's why I'm here. Let's take a ride over there and find out. Her brow furrowed. What are you doing in the hot seat? I have a smart mouth, I replied honestly. It's against the rules. She began leading me down the hall. Come on, we've got a long drive. I'll straighten everything out with Mr. Kasiji. It took more than an hour to get to the hospital, but it was worth it. Good news. Rain's operation was a success. So we can go back home, I asked anxiously. Rain smiled. The doctor was right. This is going to be a long recovery, and because it's only the two of us at Garland, they're not going to release me early. She held my hand. I know you're upset, but we're just going to have to be strong. I don't like it out there, I complained. It's too crowded, people dress funny, they talk too fast, and they're all interested in things. Cell phones and iPads and Game Boys and Starbucks. What's a Starbuck? She looked upset and older than I'd ever seen her before. I want you to listen to me, Cap, and try not to blame me. Blame you? I believe in the community, she began, and I believe in the life we've built together. But I was fooling myself to think that you were still so young that you wouldn't have to learn about the world outside ours. It's not a nice place, and I didn't want you tossed into it without a little more preparation. I'd read about depression, but this was the first time I'd actually felt it. It was like a stone pressing down on my chest. I couldn't lift it off because I didn't have the strength. I'm kind of scared, Rain. Well, don't be, she said firmly. All you have to do is focus on who you are and what your values mean to you. You've passed every state test, always in the top 5%. You're as smart and capable as anybody, more than most. What I saw in school today wasn't any test, I observed grimly. She gave me a sympathetic smile. True, information isn't the same as experience. You know what television is, but you've never watched it. You know what pizza is, but you've never tasted any. You know what friendships, but you've never had a friend. You're my friend. Of course I am, she agreed, but I'm not exactly a teenager. I'm already finished with other teenagers. I've been in real school for 1 day, and that's plenty. People are constantly screaming at each other. Two has actually resorted to physical violence. I thought violence only happened in crimes and wars, but this was over. I shrugged helplessly. I can't even explain it. You have to feel sorry for them, Rain said with a sigh. Nonviolence isn't something everyone understands. They've got these things called lockers, I raved on. The halls are lined with them, and you won't believe what they're for. They're for locking stuff away, so other people won't steal it. Why can't everybody just share? Rain must have agreed with me because she looked really worried. I poured it on thick. They don't have regular time at school, you know. They have periods. All of a sudden, an alarm goes off and you're supposed to drop what you're doing and rush off to a different room with a different teacher and do something completely different. How can anybody learn like that? There was a knock at the door, and Mrs. Donnelly poked her head into the room. She lived at Garland for a while when she was a kid, so she understands how great it was and how much I wanted to get back there. Hello, Rain. How are you feeling? It's been a long time, Flora Mundy. Rain looked her up and down. It's wonderful to see that you've done well since your family abandoned the lifestyle and value system they believed in. They talked about her parents and a few other people. Some of the names were familiar, but I didn't remember anybody. The days of Garland as a thriving commune were long over before I was born in 1994. It was a friendly conversation, but every time Rain called her Flora Mundy, Mrs. Donnelly got kind of tense. Maybe it was because her family left Garland, so she couldn't live there anymore. I know how she felt. Anyway, we were soon on our way home. Her home, not mine, unfortunately. Her house was pretty nice, except it had too many stairs. There didn't seem to be any more purpose for them than there had been the fight at school earlier in the day. The living room was a few steps down, the bedrooms were a few steps up, and the kitchen was in the middle. Mrs. Donnelly called it a split level, but what was the point of splitting a house when you could just make it flat and not have any stairs at all? Everything was more complicated in the world outside of the community. The buildings at Garland were made of wood, period. Here there was wood in some places, but also brick, stone, aluminum. Inside there was carpet and tile, white walls and other colors, and hundreds of pictures, curtains, tassels, clocks, figurines, and a million different things that people might have been useful, but might have just been for decoration. Who could tell? It seemed like an awful lot of stuff for just one house. Mrs. Donnelly lived here with their daughter, Sophie, and, of course, me now. Sophie was 16. She went to the high school. I didn't much like it that I had to be here. Multiply that by 50, and that's how much Sophie didn't like it that I had been here. Mother, are you on drugs? How could you bring that freakazoid into our house? Shh, Sophie, he'll hear you. I want him to hear me, Sophie shrieked. How else is he going to get the message to clear out? He has nowhere else to go, Mrs. Donnelly pleaded. And that's my problem? Just because he comes from the same hippy-dippy flea circus where you grew up doesn't mean we have to adopt him. Lower your voice, her mother ordered sternly. It's only for 6 weeks, 2 months at the outside. 2 months? I have to live my life. Do you know how long it took me to get Josh Weintraub to ask me out? What's he going to think when he drives up and sees this tie-dyed streak of misery draped across the porch? This whole conversation went on before either of us had spoken a single word to each other. I didn't actually talk to Sophie until later that night when I accidentally blundered into her room. She was in her pajamas, speaking on the phone while smearing pale green cream all over her face. She threw down her handset. You, out, now. I stood frozen, staring at her. What's on your face? Oh, right, you've never heard of moisturizer? You were just looking for an excuse to come busting into my room. I was mystified. What are you moisturizing? She stamped a slippered foot. My skin, genius. It's a beauty product, okay? Scram. I backed out into the hallway. She slammed the door with such force I was amazed the wall didn't crumble. The one at Garland probably would have. There I stood, still facing her door, paralyzed with discovery. Beauty. That was precisely the word that had been haunting me. Sophie Donnelly was beautiful. I had seen beautiful girls on book jackets, but even noticed some from a distance when Rain and I had gone to town for supplies. But this was the first time I'd ever really met one. I just never could have imagined how strong the effect would be. Just standing near her, even when she was yelling at me, made me feel nice. It was a strange and complex world outside Garland. Chapter 5, told from the point of view of Hugh Winkleman. Adults are always trying to figure out what makes kids tick. They send professors into middle schools to do research and run tests. They publish 1,000-page studies. Know what? They don't have a clue. If you want to understand middle school students, there's only one way to do it. Follow the wedgies. Wedgie givers and wedgie receivers. Take it from someone who's been down that road before. Sad to say, I'm one of the receivers. Zach Powers, Lena Young, and their crowd ride roughshod over a lot of people. But if statistics were taken, I'd be victim number 1. Until Capricorn Anderson showed up. Even I could pick on a guy like that. Not that I'd ever do such a thing. I'd never lower myself to the level of those nitwits. But what a kid. He wasn't nerdy in a typical way. He wasn't a computer geek or captain of the chess club. That was me. He couldn't speak Klingon. In fact, he'd never even heard of Star Trek. But just one peek at that guy and you knew that Dweeb-wise, there was a new sheriff in town. A lot of eyes were on him as we sat down in the cafeteria. God, it felt so good to not have them staring at someone else, or to have them staring at someone else for a change. I walked over to him. A guy like this was going to need all the friends he could get. One. Capricorn, right? I set my tray down across from him. I'm Hugh, from social studies class. I stuck my hand out, but he just stared at it. It wasn't a snub. Believe me, I could teach a college course on snubs. This was cluelessness. He honestly didn't know what to do. I remember you, he said finally. There are so many people here, it's hard to keep track. I can help you with that. I pointed to the table where Zach and Lena were holding court. That crowd thinks they own the place. They think that because they do. Stay away from them. They'll chop you up and press you into salami. Now, anyone you see hanging around their crew falls into one of two subgroups, the jocks and the wannabes. Stay away from both. And you definitely don't want anything to do with the goths, burnouts, skateboarders, hip-hop kids, environmentalists, or anyone who has a baseball cap on backwards. I took note of the blank expression on his face. You know, standard survival skills. I'm sure it was similar in your old school. I was homeschooled before this. No kidding. I'd heard of that, but I'd never met anyone who did it. What was it like? Wonderful, he said wanly. I'll bet my enthusiasm was genuine. It must be nice to wake up in the morning and not have to worry about walking into a hostile environment, with your next wedgie a matter of not if, but when. What's a wedgie? Wow, homeschooling must be heaven. I didn't even have an answer to that question. He'd find out soon enough. My eyes fell on Cap's lunch, which consisted of salad, carrot sticks, and 2 slices of whole wheat bread. He must have noticed because he was looking just as curiously at my hamburger. What part of the animal does that meat come from? I don't know, I chewed thoughtfully. The lips, probably. Want a bite? I'm a vegetarian. At that moment, I heard an all too familiar whoop coming from behind us. Maybe 1 kid in 1,000 would have recognized the sound, but I'm that kid. It was an incoming spitball. I tensed, waiting for impact, but it wasn't aimed at me. Instead, I watched the tiny projectile land and lodge itself amid Cap's cascading piles of long hair. He didn't even feel it. Hermits could hole up in that hair, and no two would ever meet. At Zach's table, a celebration was going on, with lots of backslapping and high fives. Daryl Pennyfield, Zach's football buddy and co-Neanderthal, was horsing around. Dead-eye, I called him, but never to his face. When his face was too close, mine was usually being stuffed into a locker. Then I caught sight of the straw in Naomi Erlanger's hand. I guess Cap's mop was an irresistible target for amateur spitballers, not just the professionals. The PA system came to life with the voice of Mr. Kasigi. Just a reminder, the election for 8th grade president will be held on Tuesday, September 26th. The position is open to all 8th graders. So far, only 1 name has been placed in nomination, Capricorn Anderson. Thank you. I was blown away. You're running for president? In your first week here? Cap scanned the ceiling. Who is that? If he wants to talk to us, why doesn't he just come into the room? But why is he talking about you? I persisted. Are you running for president? Of course not. I don't believe in government. I come from an autonomous collective. But Mr. Kasigi said, and suddenly, I just knew. The triumphant grins on the smug faces of Zach and company told the whole story. Cap hadn't placed his name in nomination. Zach had done it for him. I heard something about this last year. The 8th graders had picked this computer genius, Luke Simmerd, and got him elected president just so they could make fun of him. By the end of the year, the poor kid was so crazy that he had skipped graduation and applied to an alternative high school so he wouldn't have to face 4 more years with the people who'd made his life so miserable. Now we were the 8th graders, and it was our turn to do the same thing. Only, instead of picking the smartest guy in school, Zach had zeroed in on somebody who didn't even know what a PA system was. I opened my mouth to issue the warning. The words were forming on my tongue. Cap, get over to the office this minute and take yourself out of the nomination. Do it now before it's too late. And then it hit me. If Cap Anderson had never been born, the name announced to the whole school would have been mine. My strange and hairy new friend was the only thing preventing me from being the next Luke Simmerd. I shut my mouth and kept it shut, trying to keep my eyes off the spitball still lodged just above Cap's left ear. I felt bad about it, but I felt something else too. Better him than me. Chapter 6, from Naomi Erlanger's point of view. The time was coming. I could almost smell it. One day, Zach Powers was going to be my boyfriend. Sure, he was sniffing around Lena. Everybody knew that. But sooner or later, he'd see that she'd lacked the depth and sincerity of yours truly, and that, besides, she had the hots for Daryl, or maybe Grant Tubman, if only he'd get rid of that ridiculous tongue stud that looked like a pimple. Enough said, especially about Lena, who was my best friend. It was tough to compete with Lena, who was so naturally pretty and had a very strong personality. To be honest, she was kind of a bulldozer when it came to getting what she wanted. But I don't say that in a mean way. People did what she told them because they liked her, not just because she'd make their lives miserable if they didn't. And since I was more shy than Lena and not quite so willing to squeeze into size 0 jeans and apply makeup with a snowblower, I had to try a little harder to get Zach's attention. Who would have thought that the equalizer would turn out to be the biggest dweeb in school? No, not Hugh Winkleman. Capricorn Anderson. The minute I shot that spitball in the cafeteria, I could feel Zach noticing me. He said, "Nice trajectory," and he asked if he could finish my tater tots. I knew it was the turning point in our relationship. The road to Zach went straight through the new hippie kid. Example, Zach wanted to make Cap 8th grade president. Sure, the rest of us had our hearts set on Winkleman, but I quickly volunteered to work on Cap's election campaign. Not that everybody was running against him, but we still had to make it look real so Mr. Kasigi wouldn't get suspicious. We made posters. My favorite was Capricorn Anderson, the people's choice. Because while I was painting it, Zach said, "It doesn't have to be perfect, Naomi. It's not like anybody's going to have to vote for him." And while he was talking, his hand brushed my hand. Lena was a little suspicious when I told her we didn't need any help with the election. You definitely didn't want to get on our bad side. But by the time Zach and I started going out, she'd probably be hot and heavy with Daryl, or Grant Tubman, minus the tongue stud. So I was safe. Zach was so cool. It was almost like watching the plan beamed straight from his brain onto the screen of a blockbuster movie. We put up the posters, scared off 2 dummies who wanted to run for the job, and presto, Capricorn Anderson was elected 8th grade president, unopposed. The best part is the doofus has no idea what just happened to him, Zach said. Who knows what's going on under all his hair, snorted Lena. I personally got the impression that Cap thought all new students had to go through this, like being president was part of registering and choosing electives. But I kept my mouth shut and laughed along with the others. Zach had a great smile. When they made the announcement at the all-school assembly, Zach and Daryl hoisted the new kid up on their shoulders and marched him onto the stage. He'd been around C Average for a couple weeks, and people knew his name from our posters and had seen him in the halls, but this was the first time the entire student body made the connection. 1,100 kids took in the sight of a genuine middle school hippie. This tall, skinny, long-haired boy in tie-dye, toes poking out of his homemade sandals. He looked so silly, so goofy, so weird, that it was almost cute. Not attractive, but adorable in the sense that you can't help pitying him, like a wet puppy rolled in sand. Zach started shouting, "Speech! Speech!" and some other people took up the cry. Mr. Kasigi handed over the microphone, and we all quieted down to listen to what Cap had to say. He stared at us for a long time, until I was almost wondering if Zach had chosen someone who was so nerdy he was too perfect for the job. Then he announced, "I shouldn't be president." "Why not?" Daryl heckled. Cap struggled with that one, but when he finally spoke, his answer was as bizarre as his appearance. I don't know anybody's name. Like the president had to be able to rattle off the names of all 1,100 of his constituents, or else he wasn't qualified. Peals of laughter rolled through the gym. Even the 6th graders could see how dopey that was. I felt proud and exhilarated. I felt like the woman that's behind every great man. The one behind Zach, I mean. That was fantastic, I congratulated him when the assembly was over. He grabbed me by the arm and began towing me to the front. We're not done yet. Where are we going? His oh-so-blue eyes gleamed. If the hairball thinks it's his duty to learn 1,100 names, who are we to burst his bubble by telling him he doesn't have to? You mean... I didn't get a chance to finish the thought because he was already flagging down a very dazed 8th grade president. Poor Cap. I honestly felt sorry for him. Freshly inaugurated to an office he never ran for. Well, what would you be thinking? He just wanted to get out of there and be left alone. Remember me, Cap? I'm Zach, and this is Naomi, Zach greeted him. Now you know us. It's only a matter of time before you get the chance to meet everybody else in the school. Cap's haunted eyes took in the sight of the entire student body, more than 1,000 strong, streaming through the gym exits. If it hadn't been so funny, if Zach's eyes hadn't been almost turquoise, I would have confessed the whole thing was a gag. I'm not good at remembering names, he told us. I don't know a lot of people. We're sure you can do it, I assured him. One, he persisted. One what? One person. I see other people when we're in town for supplies, but Rain does all the talking. Rain? I questioned. My grandmother. She's the person I know. That was a thing about Cap that I would never dare to say to Zach. I could never escape the suspicion that he was putting us on even more than we were putting him on. But if that was the case, he had to be the greatest actor on the face of the earth, because he didn't crack a smile, not for a millisecond. Zach pressed on with his plan, and I pressed on with mine. We put a suggestion box in the guidance office for students to bring their concerns to the president's attention. Cap never suspected that the entries were all fake, and that we were writing them in the equipment room after Zach was done with football practice. We spent too much time laughing for any serious romance to develop, but it was fun. We were convulsed with hysterics at the thought of our hippie asking Mr. Kasigi to convert the water fountains to Gatorade and to erect a bullfighting stadium in the parking lot. Surprisingly, Mr. Kasigi seemed to be kind of going along with the gag. It was the one thing for him to keep out of student matters, like he did last year with that Simard kid. But when someone asks you for a bullfighting ring in an American public school, you have to know you're being pranked. Mind you, when you've just heard the same kid express the belief that a president has to know every student's name, you can never be 100% sure. Whatever the reason, our assistant principal never took Cap aside and explained to him that someone was yanking his chain. And we really yanked. Zach told him that he had to hold weekly press briefings for reporters from the school newspaper. The reporters? Us. We didn't work for the paper, but how was Cap going to know that? What about the real newspaper staff? I asked uncertainly. They're not invited, Zach said decisively. Those dweebs should be happy we didn't make one of them president. The first of these conferences was held in a room that didn't exist. Cap wandered the halls like a lost soul in search of a fictional geography lab. Zach planted students out there to give him bogus directions. Make a left to the music room, down the stairs, through the double doors, then 2 rights and a hard left at the furnace. We rescheduled for Friday after telling him how disappointed we were that he'd stood us up. He apologized and promised to do better. This briefing was held in room 226, which did exist but was locked. While he wrestled with the doorknob, Zach sent the football cheerleaders to form their human pyramid right beside him. They chanted, "Cap, Cap, he's our man. If he can't open it, nobody can." To tell the truth, I wasn't super high on this idea, since Lena was not only a cheerleader but also the apex of the pyramid. It was impossible to compete with anyone in a cheerleading outfit, especially at our school. Over the summer, the basement got flooded and all the uniforms shrank. I felt better when the press briefings began. Lena traded her pom-poms for a reporter's notebook, and we all spoke up for the people's right to know. Cap, what are you going to do about the terrible state of cafeteria food? Cap, the boys' locker room is a cesspool. What are your plans to improve it? Cap, have you thought about air conditioning the school buses in light of global warming? I don't have the answers to any of those things, was his grave response. Maybe you picked the wrong person to be president, which only proved that we picked exactly the right person to be president. Now that Lena was back in the plan, I had to come up with something good in order to stand out in Zach's eyes. I invented a secret admirer for Cap named Lorelei Lumley, a 7th grade student government groupie who'd slipped perfumed love notes through the vents of his locker. Those are perfect, Zach enthused. I could tell that he hadn't overlooked the bright red lip imprint that I had kissed onto every piece of stationery. Zach had Cap's combination, so we made it our mission to see that he never opened the door without finding something bizarre and or gross. It became my favorite part of the day, pressed against Zach in the drinking fountain alcove, waiting to see what Cap would pull out of there next. A rotten banana with a greasy black peel, a goat's brain from the science lab, a Ziploc baggie of Pepto-Bismol, a dead bird. Cap didn't react very much to any of these things, except the bird. We watched, amazed, as he wrapped the small body in a paper towel and marched it straight out the door. He got so far as the flower bed. There he knelt and began scrabbling with one hand in the soft dirt. Zach peered through the floor-to-ceiling window. What's he doing, digging worms? That's not it, I said in a tremulous voice. He's burying the bird. Zach was mystified. Why? Cap placed the shrouded little corpse into the hole and covered it tenderly with the earth. Then he plucked a couple of daisies and placed them across the tiny grave. He stood up, removed his psychedelic headband from that haystack of hair, and bowed solemnly. The smart move definitely would have been to hang back with Zach and make fun of the performance. But something came over me. I still can't explain it. I walked out and stood beside Cap. I wasn't a bird lover. I didn't know a canary from a condor. But the look of sympathy on the hippie's face was so honest, so pure, that it planted the emotions inside my heart. Suddenly, I had to pay my respects to this innocent creature, cut down in the prime of his life. It wasn't much of a funeral. We stood there like junior undertakers while the wind turned Cap's unbound hair into an unreasonable facsimile of a rainforest. Death is a part of life, he said simply. This is just another part of your journey. Fly well. I noticed that quite a few kids were looking on, trying to figure out if we'd gone crazy. Probably. One seventh grader took off his baseball hat in reverence. I caught a disapproving look from Zach on the other side of the window and silently cursed myself for making a mistake Lena never would have made. Yet it seemed so right, and I couldn't be sorry for that. When Zach became my boyfriend, I hoped I could make him as sensitive as Capricorn Anderson. Afterward, some of the spectators went up to Cap to say a few quiet words. He asked all of them their names. Tune in tomorrow for the next few chapters.